today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Aureli Musingo versus Gabriela Fundora title clash ordered by the IBF. A recent order that throws a serious, decent-sized monkey wrench in any unification plans for both Aureli Musingo and Marlen Esparza. The only other champion at this weight, the IBF has ordered Aureli Musingo to defend her IBF World Flyweight title against mandatory challenger Gabriela Fundora, the younger sister of Sebastian Fundora. Boxing Scene has received a copy of the letter by the IBF, which was sent to Golden Boy Promotions, who promotes Musingo, and Samson Lukowicz, who promotes Fundora. On July 13th, Carlos Ortiz Jr., who is the championship's chairman of the International Boxing Federation, the IBF, sent out the letter to the respective parties. According to the letter sent by the IBF, Musingo's mandatory defense of the title is due on or before July 29th. 9 months after winning a belt on October 29th, Musingo defeated previously unbeaten Leonela Paula Judica of Argentina by way of a split decision in San Diego. Some argued that Paula Judica did enough to win the fight. That it wasn't a clear victory for Aureli Musingo, but Aureli was the house fighter. She is promoted by Golden Boy Promotions, so you know how it goes.
Oh, it is.
Both sides have been ordered to negotiate and come to an agreement by August 13th. If a deal cannot be finalized by both sides within 30 days, the IBF will call for a purse bid. With the win over Judica, Musingo, who resides in Monterrey, Mexico, has won her last 11 bouts, 4 of them by way of split or majority decisions. The 34-year-old also was the WBO champion at 112 pounds. Fundora, 11 wins with no losses and 4 knockouts, who resides in Coachella, California, faced her toughest fight to date, her last bout on April 8th, defeating former world title challenger Maria Santizo of Guatemala by unanimous decision. There are only 2 champions at flyweight here today. Aureli Musingo is one, Marlen Esparza is the other, and both fighters, both champions, are promoted by Golden Boy Promotions. The last I heard, Marlen Esparza versus Aureli Musingo was in the works. For what would have been the undisputed flyweight championship of the world, as you can imagine, this order having come down already, with a fight not already having been made, puts a serious stifle. Serious bump in the road for Aureli Musingo, who likely would have stood to make more money boxing Marlen Esparza than defending her title against Gabriela Fundora, a high-risk, low-reward opponent and a tall drink of boxing, just like her brother. With the difference being that Gabriela Fundora, for me and my money, exhibits better range control, uses her height and length, those long levers, better than her older brother, better than Sebastian. You often see Sebastian fighting mid-range to inside, even though he's huge. He's tall for 154 pounds, but he often falls in and fights in the pocket, whereas Gabriela, she's got better distance control, a better jab. I think she's more defensible than her older brother, uses her height and length better than her older brother. Aureli Musingo, the current reigning IBF champion, she's got a lot of fights, a lot of rounds in the banks, lots of pro experience, perhaps too much. The last couple of fights, it seems to me that Aureli has lost a step, that Father Time is catching up to her, nicknamed the Machine Gun.
La ametralladora.
Highlighting Aureli's mid-range to inside pressure fighting, her mid-range to inside aggressive style, she'll be noticeably smaller than Gabriela Fundora. In truth, most flyweights, or super flyweights, are smaller than Gabriela Fundora. Shorter, stumpier fighters, as it's Gabriela that has significant height, more height than you often see in fighters that campaign at these weights.
She's taller than everybody.
It's the same deal as her brother, with better range control from Gabriela, and as stated, she'll have a noticeable height advantage, reach advantage over Aureli Musingo. She is a younger, fresher fighter. Aureli, God bless her, experience might be on her side, but she has perhaps too much experience. She looks to me like a fighter that's lost a step, and it's been noticeable her last 3 fights.
She's slowing down.
Aureli Musingo is a veteran of approximately 37, close to 40 fights, whereas Gabriela Fundora, she's just getting started at 11. So the question is, has there been enough slippage that Aureli Musingo might lose the title to Gabriela, or is Gabriela very good but still too green for Aureli?
Credible argument on either side. Aureli Musingo would be the so obviously more experienced fighter of the two, the most experienced fighter that Gabriela will have ever fought.
Though at the same time, given Gabriela's unique physical dimensions, her freshness, and her activity, that she's been very, very busy the last 3 years. She'll be sharp.
She proved to be too much for the aging fighter, the aging champion, Aureli Musingo.
It's a problem, all right. And it's as much a problem for Marlena Esparza, the only other champion at this weight, as it is for Aureli Musingo. It's a problem for everybody. Gabriela Fundora is everybody's problem.
See what develops.
In men's welterweight news, ahead of the undisputed clash set to go down towards the end of this month, Derek James says the basic skills and technique beats glamour every day of the week.
I agree with Derek James' assessment.
That's why I'm picking Terence Crawford to beat Errol Spence Jr. Having familiar names, glamour names like Danny Garcia or
Mikey Garcia.
It's got more flash and pizzazz than, say, beating a two-time Olympian in Igis Kavaliauskas or an Olympic gold medalist in Felix Diaz.
But I'm not here to evaluate who's got more flash and pizzazz in their resume. I'm here to see who's the better fighter, and I think the better fighter is Terence Crawford.
What people are enamored with is the show, the flair, said James to YSM Sports Media. But the basic skills and technique beats glamour and show every day of the week. The fundamentals that James has drilled into Spence's head on a daily basis have led to a unified title reign at 147 pounds. Crawford, though, seemingly at the top of his game, isn't able to pinpoint a single attribute that the Dallas native has over him.
I can't either. I can't think of anything that Errol Spence Jr. does better than Terence Crawford.
Now, I don't even think that Errol, a southpaw, I don't actually think he's better out of the southpaw stance than Terence Crawford. Terence, who's a switch hitter. He can fight southpaw, he can fight orthodox, and I actually think Terence is a better southpaw than Errol.
I do.
Errol Spence, who says, I don't rate his opponents high, but I rate his skill level and talent super high, in reference to Terence Crawford.
You don't have to rate David Evanesian highly. You don't have to. In truth, I don't think David Evanesian is on the level of a Sean Porter, a Danny Garcia.
But the virtue of having fought David Evanesian in the last 12 months is that it allowed Terence Crawford to keep active, to keep busy, to not allow ring rust to collect, whereas Errol hasn't fought since the Ugas fight over a year ago.
It's not a good thing.
After giving their thoughts, Spence ultimately rated Crawford a 5.4 out of 10. In addition to the low score, Spence gave Crawford's resume just a 0.5. Spence, though, burst into laughter when asked if he was serious about the score. With a smile plastered on his face, Spence admitted he was just kidding around, somewhat. Some of it is how I see it, said Spence to ESPN. Some of it is promoting the fight. Although he's been practically unbeatable at 147 pounds, one of Crawford's proudest achievements came one weight division lower during his days as super lightweight.
Becoming undisputed. What Errol Spence Jr. is still trying to be, trying to become. He's got to go through Crawford to do it.
Terence Crawford has unseated 4 reigning champions and taken on 2 Olympic gold medalists in Yuriorkis Gamboa and Felix Diaz.
She has 2 common opponents with Errol Spence and Kell Brock and Sean Porter.
But according to Errol Spence Jr., I don't rate his opponents high, but I rate his skill level and talent super high.
Culmination of 5 years worth of barbs traded between fight fans and the fighters themselves will all come to a head at the end of this month in a little over a week's time.
About 2 weeks.
If Errol loses, I actually think Errol's fans will take it harder than Errol himself, Errol Spence Jr., because at least in fighting Terence Crawford and fulfilling that goal, trying to, he can lose with his head held high. He can lose with some dignity that at least he tried.
There is some solace in that for the fighter, but for the fight fan who spent approximately 4 to 5 years diminishing Terence Crawford,
attacking him, attacking his resume, while he was alienated by the PBC, all but frozen out of the welterweight division. For that individual, if Crawford wins,
it's going to be a hard pill to swallow.
It will be.
As Errol Spence says, I was willing to sacrifice a payday and another win to wait on Terence.
We know that Errol had another option. He had the option of facing Keith Thurman at 154 pounds, which would have been an easier weight for Spence to make.
They wanted me to get another fight, Spence admitted to a pool of media members during a virtual press conference to discuss the super fight. I didn't want to risk an injury, a cut. Anything could happen. I just decided to sit in the house, chill, and just wait on Terence to fight. Or find out if the fight wasn't happening and then take another fight. I was willing to sacrifice a payday and and another win to wait on Terrence.
He says they wanted me to get another fight. Who is they?
Who's they? Is they Tim Smith? Is they Stephen Espinoza? Al Heyman? This lends credence to the notion that this isn't what they wanted for Errol Spence Jr. These circumstances. Over a year of inactivity going into the Terrence Crawford fight is not what his team wanted for him, but what he was willing to accept for himself.
Maybe he didn't want to feel like he was running. Maybe he didn't want to feel like a coward.
The Thurman fight, if it would have happened, was tabbed to take place at junior middleweight. And if it did, it would have been that much harder for Errol to boil down to 147 pounds.
The option to face Keith Thurman, who accepted the opportunity and was even willing to move forward with a non-title fight at a higher weight, Spence never publicly confirmed that deal was reached and instead dug in during the renewed talks with Crawford to produce the welterweight championship clash more than 4 years in the making.
If Errol and Keith would have fought at 154 pounds, none of Errol's 3 alphabet titles would have been on the line. In spite of that, Keith was willing to move forward with it, but Errol wasn't. That's commendable.
That he didn't go the easy route.
Even though he had the option to, but there is also backlash to be addressed. There was no one clamoring for a Spence versus Thurman fight. What people really wanted was Spence versus Crawford. And if Errol would have moved forward with that Thurman fight, he would have received backlash for it. And the fight itself, it wouldn't have generated much, as most people don't really want to see that. Today's Keith Thurman is all but irrelevant to the welterweight scene and the world title picture.
Doesn't matter.
So, there is also that to be addressed. I know the magnitude of this fight and what it means for our legacies, insisted Spence. I was willing to wait. He wasn't. I didn't want to just go out and fight somebody. I put the ego to the side and got the fight done.
It's not entirely true.
Remember that the Crawford fight fell apart for Spence late last year, and between late last year and the time this fight actually got made, there was enough time in there for Spence to squeeze in the Thurman fight, but as he said, he was afraid that he could incur an injury or a cut, just anything that could impede the Crawford fight.
So he chose not to fight.
In Errol's own words, he doesn't believe in tune-up fights anyway, and that's what Keith Thurman would have been. He would have been a tune-up fight for Errol.
But was there enough time in, say, January or February to do a fight between Keith and Errol? There was.
Errol just didn't want to roll the dice, gamble incurring an injury that would further delay the Crawford fight, and it just is what it is. As it stands, he hasn't fought in over a year.
And that's not encouraging.
In spite of that, Errol insists, I know that I can break Crawford down. I know that he is not as durable as me.
Errol's been through a lot. The car accident, the retina injury.
Perhaps that has resulted in a resilient spirit, a fighting spirit, but in terms of the physical,
I don't think it's made him more durable.
quite the opposite. In any event, Errol says it's going to be a battle of the will, and who can break who down, said Spence, whose company, Man Down Promotions, represents Frank Martin. And I know that I can break him down. I know that he's not as durable as me, and my skill set is going to overpower anything that he brings to the table.
Yeah, Crawford's skill set is not intended to withstand Errol Spence's assault so much as work around it and still get shots in there.
Got a clear example of that in the Sean Porter fight. Sean Porter, a come-forward, mid-range to inside pressure fighter who tries to overwhelm his opponents with volume. Terrence was able to effectively work around that, get shots in there, and hurt the guy. Dropped in 2 times and forced a corner stoppage.
He's not going to stand there and make himself easy for Errol Spence Jr. to find. That's a big part of the reason I have Terrence winning the fight.
Switch hitting, the movement, the counter punching.
Yeah.
Beyond the Terrence Crawford fight, should Errol Spence Jr. win, Errol says a Canelo fight sounds good. It could happen. I don't see why not.
I mean, if Errol Spence Jr. wins or loses, I see him moving up in weight. That's if he wins or loses.
Though a Canelo fight does seem like more of a possibility if he is successful later on this month. Fight against Alvarez sounds good, but I mean, Alvarez has a 3-fight deal with the PBC, so I don't know who it could be in that deal. Spence told Sean Zeidel in an interview on FightHype.com. It could be David Benavidez, then Jermall Charlo, and whoever else. He and PBC Al Heyman and whoever he did the deal with, they probably already got the names picked out. It's already pre-written. I have no idea. I get people's speculation, but at the end of the day, it's nothing but speculation. Yeah, I might jump up the weight classes. It's something I would definitely think about.
I'm sure the people at the PBC would love to make a fight between Canelo Alvarez and Errol Spence Jr. in Texas at Jerry's house, Dallas Cowboy Stadium.
And of course, if Errol were to win later on this month, if he were successful, it's natural that he'd move up in weight. It's even natural that he might skip junior middleweight altogether.
There's no big money fights at junior middleweight for Errol.
Not unless he's willing to travel to Australia to take on Tim Tszyu, who could very soon become the newly crowned WBO champion at that weight, but that doesn't seem realistic.
Errol's not going to travel.
There are even less big names at middleweight, so it is possible that if Errol were to win later on this month, they might try to negotiate a fight with Canelo at a catch weight of some kind.
We know that it's a fight that was offered to Canelo Alvarez immediately after the Caleb Plant fight.
Tom Brown of the PBC admitted as much, so we know that there is a palpable desire to do a fight like that. The real problem is that if Terence Crawford does what I think he's going to do, if he stops this guy, I don't see Spence returning to the ring anytime in the near future. I'll go as far as saying that if he loses and if he gets knocked out, he'll sit out the rest of the year.
Likely won't come back until well into next year, perhaps in a year's time, and he won't come back at welterweight.
You know, Danny Garcia, who Errol Spence Jr. beat already, he's in the process of potentially fighting Erislandy Lara for Lara's WBA title. If he wins that fight, Errol could use him as a pit stop to move north of welterweight to middleweight.
If Danny wins.
I've seen the PBC stage pointless rematches before. They could stage one again between Errol and Danny.
In the event that Errol wins this month or loses.
And I do have him losing the Terence Crawford fight. I do have him getting stopped just based on the styles and how the fighters go about fighting a fight. Errol being more of a Gatling gun, whereas Terence being more of a sniper. It's conceivable that Terence will catch him in between the punches, in between the combinations, and hit him with something he doesn't see, something he's not ready for. We saw Yordenis Ugas send Errol careening into the ropes.
Remember, he hits Errol with a hard shot, knocks his mouthpiece out of his mouth.
Errol literally goes looking for it as Yordenis Ugas is still stringing together punches, gets hit with a hard shot again, gets sent careening into the ropes. The ropes were the only thing that held him up.
Based on the rules, that should have been scored a knockdown. It obviously wasn't, but you get my drift.
Yordenis Ugas is not half the fighter that Terence Crawford is, and if he could connect with a shot like that sends Errol careening into the ropes to where the ropes are the only thing that held him up, I happen to think Terence Crawford could do a lot better than that. I think Errol Spence Jr. is gonna get stopped.
Crawford.